The Harrington Conservatory of Music was the kind of place where dreams came true for some people and stayed hidden forever for others. It was a grand building with tall windows, polished wooden floors, and hallways that always smelled like old books and fresh flowers. Students from wealthy families walked through its doors every day, carrying violin cases and sheet music, talking about competitions and scholarships. Professors in expensive suits discussed Mozart and Beethoven over cups of coffee. Everyone who belonged there knew they belonged there. And everyone who didn't knew that too. Adelina Vargas was 61 years old. She had worked at the conservatory for 32 years, pushing the same cleaning cart down the same hallways, emptying the same trash cans, and wiping down the same pianos she was never supposed to play. Her uniform was blue. Her shoes were comfortable and worn. Her hair, once black as midnight, had turned silver over the years. Most people at the conservatory didn't know her name. To them, she was just the cleaning lady, the woman who appeared after everyone left and disappeared before anyone arrived. But Adelina had a secret she had carried with her across borders, across oceans, across decades of silence. She was born in a small village in Guatemala, in a house with a dirt floor and a leaking roof. Her family was poor, but they had one treasure that made them feel rich. It was an old piano that had belonged to her grandmother. The piano was out of tune and missing 2 keys, but to young Adelina, it was the most beautiful thing in the world. She would sit on the wooden bench for hours, teaching herself to play by ear, figuring out melodies from songs she heard on the radio. Her tiny fingers moved across the keys like they already knew where to go. The villagers started calling her La Niña de las Teclas, the girl of the keys. They said she had a gift from God. They said the music that came from her hands could make the flowers grow faster and the rain fall softer. Her mother would stand in the doorway and cry while watching her play, not from sadness, but from a joy so deep it had no other way to escape. Adelina dreamed of becoming a concert pianist. She dreamed of wearing a long dress and playing on a big stage while hundreds of people listened. She dreamed of traveling the world and sharing her music with everyone who needed to hear it. At night, she would lie on her small bed and imagine the applause, the lights, the feeling of doing exactly what she was born to do. But dreams cost money, and money was something her family never had. When Adelina was 12 years old, her father got sick. Very sick. The kind of sick that requires medicine. The village doctor couldn't provide. Her mother sold everything they owned to pay for treatments. The chickens went first, then the furniture, then the pots and pans, and finally, the piano. Adelina watched 2 men carry it out of their house and load it onto a truck. She didn't cry. She just stood there, frozen, feeling like a part of her soul was being taken away. Her father died 3 months later anyway. After that, there was no more talk of music. There was only survival. Adelina worked in the fields alongside her mother. She washed clothes for other families. She did whatever she could to help put food on the table. The years passed, and the girl of the keys became just another woman trying to make it through each day. At 29, Adelina left Guatemala. She crossed into Mexico with nothing but a small bag and a photograph of her grandmother. The journey was long and dangerous. She didn't like to think about those days, about the fear that lived in her chest like a stone. But she made it. She made it to America, to a new city, to a new life that was supposed to be better. It was better in some ways. She found work. She found a small apartment. She got married, had a daughter, got divorced. Life moved forward the way life does. One ordinary day after another. She never touched a piano again, not once. It hurt too much to remember what she had lost, what she could have become if things had been different. Then she got the job at the conservatory. At first, she thought it was a cruel joke from the universe. Every single day, she was surrounded by music. She heard it through the walls, through the doors, through the floors. Young students played pieces she recognized instantly. Pieces she had taught herself as a child on that broken piano in Guatemala. Sometimes, she would stop her cart in the hallway and just listen, closing her eyes, letting the notes wash over her like warm water. But she never played. She never even tried. The pianos at the conservatory were not for people like her. They were for the students, the professors, the important people. She was there to clean, not to dream. The hardest part was watching the students take it all for granted. She saw them complain about practicing. She heard them say they were bored of their lessons. She watched them check their phones while sitting at instruments worth more than everything she had ever owned combined. They didn't understand. They couldn't understand. They had never had music ripped away from them. They had never felt the emptiness of a house without a piano, a life without a song. Sometimes, late at night when the building was empty, Adelina would walk into the main auditorium. She would stand at the edge of the stage and look at the grand Steinway piano that sat under the spotlight. It was the most beautiful piano she had ever seen, black and shining, like it was made from the night sky itself. She would stare at it for a long time, her heart aching in her chest. But she never climbed onto that stage. She never sat on that bench. She never touched those keys. Because what was the point? She was 61 years old. Her hands were rough from decades of scrubbing and mopping. Her life was already written. There was no room in her story for music anymore. That chapter had ended before it even really began. Or so she thought. She had no idea that everything was about to change. She had no idea that one night, one moment, one decision would turn her invisible life into something the whole world would see. She had no idea that the music inside her, the music she had buried for nearly 50 years, was still alive, still waiting, still hoping for one more chance to be heard. But that night hadn't come yet. For now, Adelina Vargas was just a cleaning woman at a music school. She pushed her cart. She emptied the trash. She wiped down the pianos. And she tried very hard not to remember the girl she used to be. It was the second week of December, and the conservatory was buzzing with excitement. The annual winter showcase was just 2 days away. This was the biggest event of the year. A night when the most talented students performed for an audience of wealthy donors, famous musicians, and important people from the music world. Everyone was practicing harder than ever. The hallways were filled with the sounds of violins, cellos, flutes, and of course, pianos. Adelina worked extra hours during this time. There were more rooms to clean, more floors to mop, more trash cans overflowing with crumpled sheet music and empty coffee cups. She didn't mind the extra work. She actually liked being in the building when it was so full of life and sound. It reminded her of something, though she tried not to think about what. The day before the showcase, something unexpected happened. The weather forecast had mentioned snow, but no one thought it would be serious. By late afternoon, the sky turned a strange shade of gray, and the first flakes began to fall. Within an hour, it was a full blizzard. The wind howled against the windows. The snow came down so thick you couldn't see across the street. The conservatory director made an announcement over the intercom. The winter showcase was being postponed. Everyone needed to go home immediately before the roads became too dangerous. Students grabbed their coats and bags and rushed out. Professors hurried to their cars. Within 30 minutes, the building was almost empty. Almost. Adelina was in the basement, cleaning one of the storage rooms, when the announcement was made. The intercom down there had been broken for months, so she didn't hear a thing. She just kept working, organizing old music stands and wiping dust off forgotten instrument cases. By the time she came upstairs, the building was dark and silent. She walked to the main entrance and pushed against the door. It didn't move. She pushed harder. Nothing. The snow had piled up against the outside of the door, at least 3 feet high, and it was still coming down. She tried the side entrance. Same thing. The back door. Locked and blocked. Adelina stood in the empty hallway, her heart beating faster. She was trapped. She took a deep breath and told herself not to panic. She had her phone, but when she looked at it, there was no signal. The storm must have knocked something out. She tried the landline phone in the main office, but it was dead too. The power flickered once, twice, and then went out completely. A moment later, the emergency generators kicked in, and a few dim lights came back on. She was alone. Completely alone. in a building she had worked in for 32 years but had never truly belonged to. For a while, she just sat in the hallway, waiting. Maybe someone would come back. Maybe the storm would stop. Maybe something would change. But as the hours passed, and the wind kept screaming outside, she realized she might be there all night. She walked through the building slowly, checking rooms, looking out windows at the white wall of snow. Everything felt different in the silence. The conservatory, which was usually so full of noise and movement, now felt like a museum or a church. The emergency lights cast soft shadows on the walls. Her footsteps echoed on the wooden floors. Without really thinking about it, she found herself walking toward the main auditorium. The doors were heavy, and they creaked when she pushed them open. Inside, the room was dim, but not dark. Someone had forgotten to turn off the stage lights before they left, and they were still glowing softly, powered by the generators. The light fell on the grand piano like a spotlight. The Steinway. Adelina stood at the back of the auditorium for a long time, just looking at it. Her heart was doing something strange in her chest. It was beating too fast, and there was a pressure behind her eyes that felt like tears waiting to fall. She had walked past this piano thousands of times. She had dusted it, polished it, cleaned the bench and the pedals, but she had never played it. She had never even sat down at it. That was not her place. That was not her life. But tonight, there was no one here. No students, no professors, no one to tell her she didn't belong. No one to look at her uniform and see a cleaning woman instead of a person. Tonight, it was just her and the piano and the snow falling outside like the world was being erased. She walked down the aisle between the empty seats. Each step felt heavy, like she was walking through water. When she reached the stage, she stopped. The piano was right there, just a few feet away, close enough to touch. Her hands were shaking. She climbed the 3 small steps onto the stage. The wood creaked under her feet. She walked to the piano and stood beside it, running her fingers along the smooth black surface. It was cold to the touch, but somehow it felt alive. She sat down on the bench. For a moment, she just sat there, her hands in her lap, her eyes closed. She could hear her own breathing. She could hear the wind outside. She could hear her heartbeat in her ears. Then she lifted her hands and placed them on the keys. The first note rang out into the empty auditorium, and something inside Adelina broke open. It was like a dam that had been holding back a river for 50 years, suddenly cracked and gave way. The music poured out of her, not carefully, not perfectly, but powerfully, desperately, like it had been trapped inside her body and was finally free. She played her grandmother's song first, the one she used to play in that little house in Guatemala, on that old piano with the missing keys. She hadn't heard that melody in decades, but her fingers remembered. They knew exactly where to go. Then she played Beethoven, the Moonlight Sonata, the first classical piece she had ever taught herself. She played it differently than the students did. She played it like she meant it, like every note was a word she had been wanting to say her whole life. She played for an hour, maybe 2. She lost track of time. She played pieces she didn't even know she remembered. She played things she must have heard through the walls over the years, music that had seeped into her without her realizing it. She played until her fingers ached, and her cheeks were wet with tears she didn't remember crying. When she finally stopped, the silence was enormous. She sat there, breathing hard, feeling empty and full at the same time. She felt like she had just run a marathon. She felt like she had just woken up from a very long sleep. She had no idea that a small red light had been blinking the entire time. She had no idea that the camera in the corner of the stage, set up for the winter showcase that never happened, was still connected to the conservatory's website. She had no idea that the live stream, which was supposed to broadcast student performances to donors around the world, had been running the whole time. She had no idea that while she played, one person had stumbled onto the stream by accident. Then 10. Then 100. Then thousands. By the time Adelina Vargas finally stood up from the piano bench and walked back to the hallway to find a place to sleep for the night, the video of her playing had already been shared over 50,000 times. And it was only the beginning. Adelina woke up on a small couch in the teacher's lounge. Her back was stiff and her neck was sore. But the morning light coming through the window told her the storm had passed. She sat up slowly, rubbing her eyes, feeling strange and quiet inside. Last night felt like a dream. Did she really play the piano? Did she really sit at that beautiful Steinway and let the music pour out of her after all these years? She looked at her hands. They were still a little sore. It wasn't a dream. She pushed the thought away and got up. She needed to find a way out of the building, get home, take a shower, and forget any of this ever happened. She was embarrassed. What if someone found out? What if there were cameras somewhere? She could lose her job. She could lose everything. The snow had stopped, and although the streets were still covered in white, the plows had already started working. Adelina managed to push open one of the side doors and step outside into the cold morning air. She walked to the bus stop, waited in the freezing wind, and rode home without looking at anyone. When she got to her small apartment, she made herself a cup of tea and sat by the window. She didn't turn on the television. She didn't check her phone. She just sat there, watching the snow melt on the rooftops, trying to convince herself that nothing had changed. But everything had already changed. She just didn't know it yet. Across the city, a college student named Diego couldn't sleep. He had been up late working on a paper when he accidentally clicked on a link to the conservatory's website. He was looking for information about their admissions process, thinking about applying next year. Instead, he found a live stream that was still running. At first, he thought it was a mistake. The auditorium was empty. Nothing was happening. Then a woman in a blue cleaning uniform walked onto the stage. Diego watched her sit at the piano. He watched her hesitate. And then he watched her play. He had never heard anything like it. The music wasn't perfect in the technical sense. There were moments where the rhythm wavered, notes that didn't land exactly where they should. But there was something else there. Something that made his chest tight and his eyes water. It was raw. It was real. It was like listening to someone's soul speak out loud. When the video ended, Diego immediately downloaded it before the live stream cut off. He uploaded it to social media with a simple caption. "I don't know who this woman is, but this is the most beautiful thing I've ever heard." By the time the sun came up, the video had been shared 10,000 times. By noon, it had reached 100,000. By evening, it was everywhere. News stations started picking up the story. Mystery piano player captivates the internet. Cleaning woman's secret talent goes viral. Who is the woman in blue? The video played on morning shows and late-night programs. People who knew nothing about classical music were sharing it with their friends. Comments poured in from every corner of the world. "I'm crying and I don't even know why. This is what music is supposed to feel like. Someone find this woman. The world needs to hear her play again." Millions of people watched Adelina's hands move across the keys. Millions of people heard the pain and the beauty and the longing in every note. And among those millions were 3 people whose lives had been built on music. 3 people who understood exactly what they were witnessing. The first was a pianist from South Korea. His name was Ji-hoon Park, and he was considered one of the greatest living performers of classical music. He had played at the most famous concert halls on every continent. He had won every award a pianist could win. He had spent his entire life chasing perfection. When he watched Adelina play, he stopped caring about perfection. He watched the video 7 times in a row. Then he called his manager and canceled his next 3 performances. "I need to go to America," he said. "I need to find her." The second was an Italian composer named Lucia Ferrante. She was 74 years old and had written music for orchestras, films, and operas. She had worked with legends. She had been called a genius more times than she could count. But lately, she had felt empty. The music didn't come to her the way it used to. She wondered if she had lost whatever spark had made her special. Then she saw the video of the cleaning woman. Lucia watched it once, and something woke up inside her. She watched it again, and ideas started flooding her mind. Melodies. Harmonies. A piece she suddenly needed to write. She booked a flight to America that same night. She had to meet this woman. She had to understand where that music came from. The third was a Russian conductor named Alexei Volkov. He was 68 years old. and had led some of the most famous orchestras in the world. But he had retired 5 years ago, bitter and disappointed. He felt that modern musicians had lost their connection to the heart of music. They were technically brilliant but emotionally empty. He had given up hope of ever hearing something that truly moved him again. His granddaughter sent him the video with a simple message. "Grandpa, watch this." Alexei almost didn't click on it. He was tired of being disappointed, but something made him press play. Within 30 seconds, he was leaning forward in his chair. Within a minute, tears were rolling down his weathered cheeks. Within 2 minutes, he was reaching for his phone to call the airline. He didn't know who this woman was. He didn't know her story. But he knew one thing with absolute certainty. This was the real thing. This was what he had spent his whole life searching for, and he had to find her before the world chewed her up and spit her out. By the end of that day, 3 of the most respected musicians on the planet were all traveling to the same place. None of them knew about the others. They were coming from different countries, different backgrounds, different corners of the music world. But they were all being pulled by the same force. They had heard something in Adelina's playing that most people spend their whole careers trying to create. It wasn't technique. It wasn't training. It was truth. Pure, unfiltered, heartbreaking truth. And they knew, somehow, that this woman had no idea what she had done. She had no idea that her private moment of grief and joy and memory had been witnessed by the entire world. She had no idea that her life was about to be turned completely upside down. Back in her small apartment, Adelina finished her tea and washed her cup. She went to bed early, exhausted from the strange night before. She slept deeply, dreaming of her grandmother's house, of the old piano with the missing keys, of a little girl who believed she could be anything. She had no idea that when she woke up tomorrow, nothing would ever be the same again. Adelina woke up to the sound of someone knocking on her door. It was early, barely 7 in the morning. She wasn't expecting anyone. She never had visitors. She put on her robe and walked slowly to the door, thinking maybe it was a neighbor who needed something. When she opened the door, she saw a young woman holding a microphone and a man behind her with a large camera pointed directly at her face. "Mrs. Vargas," the woman said quickly, "how does it feel to be the most talked-about musician in the world right now?" Adelina stared at her. She didn't understand the question. She didn't understand why there was a camera. She didn't understand anything. "I'm sorry," she said softly. "I think you have the wrong person." She closed the door. The knocking started again almost immediately. This time louder. More urgent. Adelina backed away from the door, her heart pounding. What was happening? Why were these people here? She went to her window and looked outside. There were more vans parked on her street, more people with cameras. Someone was pointing at her building. Her phone started ringing. She picked it up and saw 17 missed calls from numbers she didn't recognize. Her voicemail was full. She had over 200 text messages. With trembling hands, she opened one of the messages. It was from a co-worker at the conservatory. "Adelina, is that really you in the video? The whole world is talking about you. Are you okay?" "What video?" She opened another message. This one had a link. She clicked on it, and suddenly she was watching herself. She was watching herself walk onto the stage at the conservatory. She was watching herself sit at the piano. She was watching herself play. The video had over 12 million views. Adelina dropped the phone. Her legs felt weak. She sat down on the edge of her bed and tried to breathe. This couldn't be happening. This wasn't real. She had been alone. She had been completely alone. How was this possible? She thought about the camera in the corner of the stage. The one they used for the winter showcase. She had seen it 1,000 times but never thought about it. Never imagined it could be recording. Never imagined anyone would ever see. But now everyone had seen. The whole world had watched her most private moment. The moment she had kept hidden for 50 years. The music she had buried so deep she thought it would never come out again. She didn't know whether to laugh or cry. She did both. An hour later, her phone rang again. This time it was the conservatory director. His voice was shaking. "Adelina, Please come to the conservatory. There are people here who want to meet you. Important people. I don't know how to explain this. Just please come." She almost said no. She almost hung up and turned off her phone and pretended none of this was real. But something stopped her. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was the little girl inside her who had dreamed of being heard. Finally getting her wish. She got dressed in the nicest clothes she owned, which wasn't much. A simple black dress she wore to church sometimes. Comfortable shoes. She didn't have makeup or jewelry. She just had herself. When she arrived at the conservatory, she couldn't believe what she saw. The street was filled with news vans and reporters. People were holding signs with her name on them. Students were gathered on the steps, waiting and watching. When they saw her walking toward the building, someone started clapping, then someone else, then everyone. Adelina walked through the crowd with her head down, her cheeks burning. She didn't know how to handle this. She had spent her whole life being invisible. And now everyone was looking at her. Inside the building, the director met her at the door. His eyes were red like he had been crying. He took her hand and led her to the main lobby. And that's when she saw them. 3 people were standing there, waiting for her. She didn't know who they were. But something about them made her stop. They carried themselves differently than anyone she had ever met. They looked at her with a kind of intensity that made her feel like they could see right through her. The first one stepped forward. He was a Korean man, maybe in his 50s, with kind eyes and silver hair. He bowed his head slightly before speaking. "My name is Ji-hoon Park," he said. "I have played piano for 40 years. I have performed on the biggest stages in the world. But when I watched you play, I felt like I was hearing music for the first time." Adelina didn't know what to say. She just stood there, frozen. The second person approached her, an elderly Italian woman with white hair and elegant hands. She was crying, but she was also smiling. "I am Lucia Ferrante," she said. "I have written music my whole life. Symphonies, operas, film scores. But I had lost my inspiration. I thought I would never create again. Then I saw you, and the music came back to me. You gave me something I thought was gone forever." Adelina felt tears running down her own cheeks. She couldn't speak. She couldn't move. The third person was a tall Russian man with a stern face and deep-set eyes. He didn't smile, but there was something soft in his expression. Something vulnerable. "I am Alexei Volkov," he said. "I conducted orchestras for 45 years. I retired because I lost faith in music. I thought no one understood it anymore. No one felt it. Then my granddaughter showed me your video, and I realized I was wrong. You reminded me why I fell in love with music in the first place." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice cracked. "The world owes you an apology," he said, "for making you wait this long." Adelina covered her face with her hands. She was sobbing now. The director brought her a chair, and she sat down because her legs couldn't hold her anymore. These people, these famous musicians whose names she had heard over the years, were standing in front of her, telling her she had given them something. Her, the cleaning woman, the invisible one. She didn't know how long she sat there crying. It could have been minutes. It could have been an hour. But at some point, she heard another voice. A voice she hadn't heard in 5 years. A voice that made her whole body freeze. "Mama?" Adelina looked up. Standing in the doorway of the conservatory was her daughter, Rosa. She was 40 years old now, with the same dark hair Adelina used to have. The same eyes as her grandmother. She was holding a tissue in one hand and her phone in the other. Rosa had stopped talking to Adelina 5 years ago. She had been ashamed of her mother, ashamed that she cleaned buildings for a living, ashamed that she had never become anything important. They had argued, said things they couldn't take back. And then the silence began. 5 years of silence. 5 years of birthday cards that were never opened. 5 years of phone calls that were never answered. But now Rosa was here. And she was crying. "I saw the video," Rosa whispered. "I watched it. And I didn't even recognize you at first. But then I saw your hands. I knew your hands. And I listened to you play. And I realized I never knew you at all." She walked toward her mother slowly, like she was afraid Adelina might disappear. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" Rosa asked. "Why didn't you tell me who you really were?" Adelina stood up. Her legs were shaking, but she found her voice. "Because I forgot," she said. "I forgot who I was. I buried her so deep I thought she was gone. But she was always there. She was just waiting." Rosa closed the distance between them and wrapped her arms around her mother. They held each other in the middle of the conservatory lobby, surrounded by cameras and famous musicians and hundreds of people watching. But in that moment, it was just the two of them, a mother and daughter, finally seeing each other clearly for the first time. When they finally pulled apart, Rosa took her mother's hand. "I have someone I want you to meet," she said. She turned toward the door and gestured to someone outside. A moment later, a small girl walked in. She was maybe 7 years old, with big, curious eyes and dark, curly hair. Adelina's breath caught in her throat. "This is your granddaughter," Rosa said. "Her name is Camila. She's been taking piano lessons for 2 years." The little girl looked up at Adelina with a shy smile. "Grandma," she said, "can you teach me how to play like you?" And for the first time in a very long time, Adelina laughed. A real laugh. A free laugh. The kind of laugh that comes from somewhere deep inside, where the pain used to live. She knelt down and took her granddaughter's small hands in her own. "Yes, mija," she said. "I would love to teach you." 6 months had passed since the night of the snowstorm. 6 months since Adelina touched the piano and changed everything. Sometimes she still woke up in the morning and expected to find her cleaning cart waiting for her by the door. Sometimes she still reached for her blue uniform before remembering that she didn't need it anymore. Her old life felt like a dream now. A long, quiet dream that had lasted for decades. So much had changed. The Korean pianist had become her mentor. He worked with her 3 times a week, not to teach her how to play, but to help her trust herself. He said she already knew everything she needed to know. The music was already inside her. She just needed to stop being afraid of it. The Italian composer had written a piece for her, just as she promised. She called it La Niña de las Teclas, the girl of the keys. When Adelina heard it for the first time, she cried so hard she couldn't breathe. It sounded like her whole life turned into music. The poverty, the loss, the decades of silence. And finally, the hope. The Russian conductor had come out of retirement. He said he wasn't done yet. He said Adelina had reminded him why he started making music in the first place, and he wanted to be part of whatever came next. Offers poured in from everywhere. Concert halls, television shows, recording studios. Everyone wanted a piece of her story. Everyone wanted the cleaning woman, who could play piano like an angel. At first, Adelina said no to everything. It was too much, too fast, too overwhelming. But then one offer came that she couldn't refuse. The Sydney Opera House, one of the most famous concert halls in the world. They wanted her to perform there, on the main stage, in front of 2,000 people. They wanted her to play the piece that the Italian composer had written for her. They wanted to broadcast it live to millions of viewers around the globe. Adelina's first instinct was to say no. She was 61 years old. She had never performed in front of an audience in her life. She had spent the last 30 years cleaning buildings and staying invisible. How could she possibly stand on that stage? But then she thought about her grandmother. She thought about the old piano in that little house in Guatemala. She thought about the little girl who used to dream of playing for the world. That little girl was still inside her. That little girl had been waiting for this moment her entire life. She said yes. The months of preparation were intense. She practiced for hours every day. Her hands, which had spent so many years holding mops and cleaning rags, grew strong again on the keys. The calluses softened, the stiffness faded. Her fingers remembered things her mind had forgotten. Melodies from her childhood. Pieces she had taught herself decades ago. Music she had heard through the walls of the conservatory and absorbed without even knowing it. Her daughter moved back to the city to be closer to her. They talked every day now. They made up for the 5 years of silence, with long conversations over coffee, walks in the park, dinners that lasted for hours. Her daughter told her things she had never shared before. About her marriage, about her struggles, about how much she had missed her mother even when she was too proud to admit it. And little Sophia came over every weekend for piano lessons. She was a natural, just like her grandmother. Her small fingers moved across the keys with a confidence that made Adelina's heart swell. Sometimes, watching her granddaughter play, Adelina saw herself as a child again. She saw the girl she used to be. The girl who believed anything was possible. The night before she left for Sydney, Adelina couldn't sleep. She sat by the window of her apartment and looked out at the city lights. She thought about everything that had brought her to this moment. The poverty, the sacrifice, the piano that was sold to pay for medicine, the father, who died anyway, the journey across borders, the decades of invisible work, the loneliness, the silence, and then the snowstorm. The empty auditorium, the piano waiting for her under the spotlight, the moment she finally let herself play again. It was strange to think that all of it had led to this. Every painful moment, every quiet year, every time she had walked past a piano and forced herself not to touch it, all of it had been building towards something she couldn't see. Maybe that was how life worked, she thought. Maybe the hard parts weren't just hard parts. Maybe they were preparing you for something bigger, something you couldn't imagine until you were standing right in front of it. The flight to Sydney was long, but Adelina didn't mind. She sat by the window and watched the clouds pass beneath her. Her daughter sat beside her, holding her hand. Her granddaughter sat on the other side, drawing pictures of pianos in a little notebook. When they landed, there were people waiting for her at the airport. Fans who had seen the video. Reporters who wanted interviews. Musicians who wanted to shake her hand. It was overwhelming, but Adelina smiled through all of it. She was learning how to be seen. The night of the performance, Adelina stood backstage and tried to calm her breathing. She could hear the audience on the other side of the curtain. 2,000 people, 2,000 strangers who had come to hear her play. The thought made her dizzy. The Italian composer found her there, standing alone in the shadows. "Are you nervous?" she asked. Adelina nodded. Terrified, the old woman smiled and took her hands. "Good," she said. "That means you care. The ones who stop being nervous are the ones who stop feeling the music. You will never be one of those people." She squeezed Adelina's hands. "Go out there and show them who you are. Not who they think you are. Not the story they read about. The real you. The one who has been waiting her whole life for this moment." Adelina hugged her. Then she took a deep breath and walked toward the stage. The curtain rose, the lights hit her face. For a moment, she couldn't see anything but brightness. Then her eyes adjusted, and she saw them. 2,000 people. All looking at her. All waiting. She walked to the piano. It was a beautiful instrument, black and shining, just like the Steinway at the conservatory. She ran her fingers along its surface and smiled. Then she looked out at the audience and found her daughter in the front row. Her daughter was holding Sophia on her lap. The little girl waved at her, and Adelina waved back. She sat down on the bench. The auditorium went silent. So silent, she could hear her own heartbeat. She placed her hands on the keys, and she played. She played the piece the Italian composer had written for her. She played it with everything she had. Every memory. Every loss. Every year of silence. Every dream she had buried and forgotten. She poured it all into the music, and the music carried it out into the world. When she finished, there was a moment of complete stillness. The last note hung in the air like a question. Adelina sat with her hands in her lap, her eyes closed, her heart pounding. Then the applause began. It started slowly, like rain beginning to fall. Then it grew louder and louder. People were standing, People were cheering. People were crying. Adelina opened her eyes and looked out at the audience. They were all on their feet. Every single person. 2,000 people. Standing and clapping and crying for her. For the cleaning woman, for the girl of the keys, for the woman who had waited 61 years to be heard. She stood up from the bench and took a bow. Tears were streaming down her face. But she didn't wipe them away. She let them fall. She had earned those tears. She looked at her daughter and her granddaughter in the front row. They were both crying too. Her daughter blew her a kiss. Sophia was jumping up and down, clapping her little hands. Adelina smiled. A real smile. The kind that comes from somewhere deep inside, from a place where pain has turned into something beautiful. She had spent her whole life being invisible. She had spent decades believing that her dreams were over, that her music was gone, that she was nothing more than what the world saw when it looked at her. But she was wrong. She had always been more. She had always been the girl of the keys. She just needed the world to catch up, and now it had.